Hi, everybody, and welcome back to a new majority. My name is Isabel, and I am your host. I want to start off with thanking everybody for their support. It really means a lot. I'm really excited to grow this channel with you guys, and just seeing everybody react really positively, giving me a lot of love and suggestions and messages has really meant a lot. And I just want you guys all to know that I was really scared to do this. I think that sometimes we set some goals for ourselves or some projects for ourselves that we really want to do but never find the time or kind of are hesitant because we're putting ourselves out there. And so I really appreciate everybody giving me some type of reassurance and telling me that I'm doing a good job and that you guys like what I'm putting out there. It means a lot to me. So let's get into it. The news this week slash what happened last week. So let's start off with the accidental leak. So sensitive war plans were unintentionally exposed, which included top officials like Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and a journalist from The Atlantic. Operational details were exposed with precise military strategies and targets. The timing of attack with the exact date and time of military action was revealed in the strike package, which means that specific weapon systems and military units were identified. In the battle damage assessment, which is basically classified methods and anticipated damage outcome leaks. So when this journalist was added into this group chat, he had no idea what was going on. And he also had no idea that this actually happened. At first, he thought it was a joke. And then he looked in the news and saw that this attack on Yemen actually took place. So I should kind of highlight a little bit about what's going on and how that came to be. And I just want to put it out there that there was a congressional hearing on this where those involved did not admit any wrongdoing. The White House press secretary has not corrected this, and President Trump has not denounced this. So even though this was a horrible mistake, there's no accountability for this mistake. Now, I think had it been a person of color who had done this, DEI would have been blamed, as we're seeing is kind of a common trope right now. With that being said, I do want to talk about DEI. So I went on the White House page to kind of just get an idea of what they were doing. And according to the White House page, they are ending radical and wasteful government programs and preferencing. And I want to start off with saying that DEI has always faced resistance. From school desegregation to today's corporate policies, efforts towards inclusion have been met with hostility. And I'm sure there's an infamous picture that you guys have seen with Ruby Bridges, a young black girl being escorted by US Marshals into one of the first integrated schools. And all around her, you'll see white people looking at her, people with signs, with these looks of hatred. And so the war on diversity has never ended, it's just evolved. And President Trump has reignited opposition to DEI more forcefully. DEI is now being blamed for issues like plane crashes and military leadership changes without any investigation. So the modern resurgence of DEI came from George Floyd's death on May 25th, 2020. George Floyd was brutally murdered by police, an act caught on video that sparked nationwide protests. And I just want to add that this is because of the new digital age that we're in that we were able to see this. But can you imagine how many times this has happened without us being able to witness? His death highlighted how systemic violence is disproportionately inflicted on Black and Brown communities. And in response to this, organizations embrace DEI as a way of addressing representation, opportunity, and inclusion. And I remember this. This was a deep time of reflection and hope. This time inspired deep thought and solidarity, especially among communities of color. And as a person of color myself, a child of immigrants, I felt hopeful as institutions began prioritizing racial justice. It felt like a collective step toward a more just future. But now we're seeing that that was short lived. Ever since Trump took office, companies are rolling back on their DEI policies. Trump claimed that hiring should be based solely on experience, performance, and quality, implying DEI hires are unqualified. And I just want to put it out there that Kamala Harris, a highly experienced elected official who served as a DA, senator, and vice president, was called a DEI hire. And so, what's going on? DEI is about diversity, reflecting a range of communities, backgrounds, and perspectives. Equity is about addressing equal access to resources based on need. Inclusion is ensuring people feel welcomed and can fully participate. DEI is not a magic solution to hiring unqualified people. It's about removing barriers to access and opportunity. So there's a common myth that people get jobs through DEI without being qualified. The reality is, every person of color I've ever met and every person of color out there has had to work twice as hard at least. Many of us don't have parents that work in the field. Many of us don't have the connections or even the financial support to we succeed through grit and resilience. A lot of people of color that I know that are at universities or marginalized people that are at universities are working not just one job, two, three. Many of us have to work very hard to support ourselves. And so when DEI is blamed for tragedies like this plane crash, it's demonization. And President Trump is blaming a, a, a plane crash on DEI is a dangerous narrative. It casts people of color as threats rather than professionals. And POC are still underrepresented today. Despite underrepresentation, we're constantly demonized while white privilege always goes unchecked. It's not about saying that white people don't work hard. I'm sure they do. Many do. I know they do, but they don't have to prove themselves the way that people of color do. And for us to succeed, it often means beating many odds, many barriers, breaking many walls. And so we're judged for struggling, but we're also judged for succeeding. We wouldn't have ever needed any type of DEI if equality always existed, but that's not where we are. And so I ask you guys, what's the real threat of DEI? And from my perspective, it's equality. Up next is a very interesting interview with Dr. McGowen, political scientist and former director of the Race and Racism Project. Dr. McGowen so gracefully offered his assistance in being able to share his perspective with you guys and with me. I'm so excited for you guys to check out this interview. I will link below some of his work and I will link below the Race and Racism Project so you guys can see all the great work they have been doing and all the insightful movements that have been captured from the integration of schools to the civil rights movement. And I'm really excited to share this with you guys. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to A New Majority. I have with me here Dr. McGowen. Dr. McGowen is a professor of political science here. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, enjoying the rain outside. So, you're a professor of political science with expertise in race and ethnicity, political behavior, and public opinion. And I'm just curious to know what drew you to that field and what motivates you.
Well, actually, for as long as I've been living, frankly, my family has been in politics in
Oh,
Houston,
wow.
Texas. So my grandfather was one of the first black city councilmen that was elected in Houston, Texas. He was also one of the first black people on the school board.
Wow.
My father, he's worked with campaigns with pretty much everyone down in Houston. He was actually the district office manager for Sheila Jackson Lee. My grandmother, she founded an organization called the Houston Black Area Democrats,
Awesome.
which was an advocacy organization for that. And she also unsuccessfully ran for city council as well. And so yeah, so we've been in politics for a long time. And so when it came down to me, I wasn't really about the whole like running for office politics game, but I was about the research of it. And so that's why I decided to go through and research those things that, frankly, I had been seeing all of my life.
Awesome. I love that. That's so cool. And I can only imagine how fun or exciting it must have been like growing up like that, especially very involved in your community. And so you're the director of the Race and Racism Project here at the university. So I was
Former director.
former director. Okay. Um, what was one of the most interesting things that you were able to discover or shocking?
Well, when we first started the Race and Racism Project, we did it about it was basically designed to see what the university's relationship with race actually was, and how to, improve upon it, build upon the successes and things like that. And then we switched it more towards a kind of a broader understanding of the Central Virginia region, of Richmond and the Central Virginia region. And so one of our fellows did a project, a really interesting project, on this organization called the True Reformers. And so there were organizations. So all of this used to be a plantation, right?
Mhm.
And so once we had emancipation, the True Reformers decided to buy some of the land on the plantation and start a mutual benefit society, like start a society where they would sell plots of land, and then people could come from all over the country and be able to settle in a nice place of land, have a house, have a little bit of land to farm on and things like that, to get started after emancipation. And so they basically brought in people from all over they sold lots. They sold lots of land, and you can actually go through, look at the tax office, and see exactly where these plots of land are. And so the true reformers, they're like, okay, we're going to have this society for these African Americans so that they can build wealth and things like that. And so at the same time this is happening, the University of Richmond is moving from downtown out to where we are right now, and they're billing this area as a white man's paradise. They're basically
Mm.
saying you're going to be, because the emancipated slaves were downtown, they were in Churchill, they were in Jackson Ward, places like that, but that's where they were when they were slaves. And so the idea was that you could come out to West Hampton and it's a white man's paradise, right? And so it's going to, nice big houses, nice big lots, all this other kind of stuff. So this is happening at the same time the true reformers are trying to do the same thing, not necessarily as a white man's paradise, as a black people's paradise, if you will.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is that the true reformers, they fall on hard times. Their organization falls on hard times. And so the developers that were, developed, University of Richmond is coming down, all the houses are coming down and things like that. And so the developers end up buying those plots of land from the true reformers, right? Now they bought them above market value, right? So they got their money's worth for it, but they ended up buying that land. And that land, that property is right there off of Ridge Avenue,
Wow.
right? So right there where River and Ridge are. So
Mhm.
like all back there where that Walgreens is, that Westwood Pharmacy, all that other off Forest Street,
Yeah.
all that back there is where the true reformers actually had their plots of land. And so if you spin it forward, those houses are worth $1 million, right? Like these houses on the other side of College Road, they're worth millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And so it was just really interesting to see how history was working, in the sense that it's not like, they got like intimidated off of their land, right? It's not like they got swindled out of their property. It was a fair business transaction. But once you start getting restricted housing covenants and start getting redlining and things like that, the property value of those people ended up skyrocketing. Whereas where the true reformers ended up moving to the new place, those property values aren't nearly as high. So that was one of the really interesting things that came about when we were doing the research.
Yeah, and that's super interesting. I never knew any of that. I mean, I knew the university like moved here, but I didn't know like the history behind the true reformers. And
Mhm.
wow, that's very powerful. And I hope that people listening to this, they're learning a lot. And taking a look at the race and racism project,
Oh, by
and
the way, this is Janice Thomas, one of our fellows. She's a fellow spider, so
oh
she's still here. That
yeah.
was her project, not mine.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. But I see that you work closely with students on issues of civic engagement. So, what is our roles of students right now in our current political climate?
I would say in the current political climate, um, civic engagement can take many forms.
Hmm.
And so, maybe anticipating the future question, um, civic engagement can take many forms, but Unfortunately, sometimes civic engagement is not without consequence.
Yeah.
Right? And so as we may want to go back and romanticize the civil rights movement or romanticize farm workers and Cesar Chavez's and all that other folks were losing their jobs,
Yeah, they were.
right?
A lot of
Folks were
risk.
getting put in jail, like just for their activism, just for going against the status quo. And so as students, you're in a particularly precarious position because you're just coming of age, right? You're just coming to the point where you have the mental capacity and the resources to try to have some kind of effect on the world, right?
Yeah.
You recognize, but one should understand that there may be consequences to those actions. And so when you choose to engage in them, or when you choose which types of behaviors to engage in or how to actually engage in those behaviors, just understand that, some stuff could happen,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's like the world's not fair.
It's not.
If it was fair, you wouldn't be protesting.
Yeah, that's true.
But the fact that it's not fair means that the fruits of your protest or whatever comes from it may also not be fair.
Yeah, and that's a very important point, and I think we're seeing that all across the country now, especially at places like Columbia University, where they're now expelling students and reprimanding them for their role in protests last year. And so, you know, for many students that depend on scholarship or financial aid, and sometimes they do have to speak out against their institution. It seems like there's a really high cost to that. So, how do we kind of navigate the cost? And I guess, like, is it more so putting pressure on our allies that have protections to speak out for us? Or what's our role in that?
Okay, I guess the short answer is find out where your allies are and who's going to give you cover.
Mhm.
Right? Like, find out who your allies are and who's going to give you cover. But at the same time, there's no reason to protest just for protest's sake.
Yeah.
Right? There's no reason to protest to engage in the activity. The protest has to have some kind of end that
Mhm.
you expect to get to. The
Yes.
protest has to have something that is going to be a tangible difference, right? And so expressing your displeasure about something that's going on in society is fine. And there are plenty of avenues to express your displeasure for what's going on in society that aren't going to threaten your livelihood.
Yeah.
But you have to ask yourself, in what is my protest really going to make a difference, or is my protest more allowing me to feel like I was doing something? And it's a little different, right? Those two things are they're not mutually exclusive, but they are different. And so I would say, as students, you have to really think about that, right? What I would also say is that not everyone who is organizing or going to these protests with you have the same vulnerabilities. And you may not know whether or not everyone who's with you is as vulnerable. And those who are with you who may not be as vulnerable may have an incentive to make you think that they're vulnerable so that you can think that they're on your side. Not saying that they're not,
Yeah.
right? But this idea, I understand where you're coming from, all this other kind of stuff. And so you, as the individual student, have to really sit there and think about, what are going to be the fruits of this activity? What is this really getting me? Why am I actually engaging in these particular behaviors?
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I think definitely we do have to make sure we analyze why we are doing what we're doing and not protesting for protest's sake, too, because we do need to see a tangible difference with their actions.
And that's the other thing, right? And so a lot of times when we talk about political behavior and when we choose it, when we talk about engaging in these kinds of unconventional participatory behaviors like protests and things like that, a lot of it comes from your social network group.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes from your peer group, right?
Mhm.
And so it becomes a collective activity of the group as opposed to individuals saying, I really want to engage in this action for this particular aim. And so if all your friends are sitting up in the dorm room and they're making signs, or they're saying we're going to go down to Monument and actually protest and things like that, right? Um, that's cool, but a lot of it, and this is how all political participation works, not just protests. It's how voting works, it's how donating, it's how attending rallies work. All of that works with this social component to it. We call these solidary benefits. SOLIDARI. Solidary benefits. And the solidary benefits, so you have material benefits and you have solidary benefits. The material benefit is, okay, if I vote for this person, my taxes are going to get cut. So I have more money in the bank, right? The solidary benefit is the kind of, I'm helping out my team. I like the people I volunteer with. Me and my friends are going to phone bank or we're going to door knock together, right?
Okay.
And so it's that togetherness of the activity that makes people want to do it more. And then the fact that your preferred official may get elected is, somewhat tangential. But those other benefits, that community, that friendship benefit is actually really, really important in how we mobilize people to participate.
Yes. And I agree. I do agree with that. And thank you for differentiating solitary and material benefits. I'm not a political science student. So I appreciate you breaking that down. So, right now with classrooms having, a few students of color, I know we go to a private university, so maybe here it's a lot less people of color than it would be, I guess, like at a state school. Um, how does the lack of diversity, would you say, especially somewhere like in the South here, impacts the classroom?
Well, I mean, I'm sure everyone knows that the kind of trope of the token minority,
Mm-hmm.
right? The person that is going to the person that whenever there's an issue with minorities, they look towards that person
Yeah.
to actually be the one to speak for the entire community and things like that. And so that's definitely difficult. Beyond that, what I would say, the lack of diversity in the classroom makes people feel like others,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Definitely.
so it makes people feel like others, and therefore it may make people think that if they express their views, then people are going to think that they shouldn't be part of our society in the sense of our community, in the sense of our university, and things like that. But as much as we want to talk about it for racial and ethnic minorities, it's happening the same way for white conservatives, right?
Yeah.
It's happening the same way because a minority is a minority. We can talk about minorities in terms of race and ethnicity. There are minorities of viewpoint, there are
Mm-hmm.
minorities of income and education, there are
Yeah.
minorities of all those points. And so it's no different than that person who really likes Trump but knows that most of the people in their classroom does not. What purchase do they get for speaking up? Right? Like what benefit truly comes from them speaking up? I mean, you're not going to change people's mind, but what detriment comes from them speaking up? Right?
Yeah.
You walk out of class and someone's like, man, did you hear what so and so said? Or can you believe so and so, said this about this and that, and that? Right? And so
Yeah.
now that person, for a probably valid opinion that they expressed in a 9 o'clock introduction to American government class, When they walk into the D hall, your whole table is looking at
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really I think it's something that's definitely not talked about, because I have heard from people express that, like conservatives don't really have a space to talk on college campuses and how they could feel like isolated. Like I know my experience is definitely like just one experience out of many, but I have noticed like in my political science classes that a lot of students are very conservative, especially at a school like Richmond. And you're a political science professor, so you can tell me, but I feel like in my classes I feel like I have a more progressive stance, but it seems like I'm usually like one of two people that have that progressive stance.
Yeah, I mean, every section is different, and a lot of it depends upon what the class is about, like what level is the class on,
Yeah.
what things are actually happening in the class. But what I can tell you is
Hmm.
that when we have these discussions in class and things like that, the discussions in class are a lot different than what people write in their papers.
Hmm.
Okay. And so even when you're talking about this kind of left right or this kind of liberal conservative, what y'all write in y'all's papers is beyond that. Right? There are no holes barred in your papers. And I try to let my students know, whatever your political opinion is, that's fine with me, right? And so that's why I say you can kind of see the muting,
Hmm.
because it's like you clearly feel really passionate about this thing. When I gave you the opportunity to speak about it in class, you didn't say anything. And
Yeah.
so that's the question as to why.
Yeah.
Now, this whole idea about conservative opinion being stifled on college campuses, that's BS.
Yeah, I agree.
That's not right, right? Because no one is stopping those people from actually expressing viewpoints that may be um, that may be that people may not like, right?
Yeah.
There's a big difference between the university sponsoring someone
Hmm.
who's going to give a viewpoint that people don't like, and any individual with a forum, with an open mic, with a letter to the editor and the collegian can start a podcast, probably get space to actually do their podcast about whatever they want. No one's going to, right? There's a difference between those two kinds of things. And so as we begin to talk about this whole idea, then we have to make those distinctions. We have to make that kind of nuance, to understand, right? Like one person's free speech is one person's free speech does not necessarily give them the right to the right to say stuff that maybe would hurt other people.
Yeah.
Right? So like if we're really being real,
Hmm.
right? Like, and I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this, but whatever. You are a client of the university.
Yeah.
The university needs you to be like, okay, I'm gonna give you my money so that you can then go and pay Professor McGowan, right? And so the university has no incentive to make you sad.
Yeah.
They have no incentive to make you feel bad because your money spends just like the next person's money. And so when you start talking about this idea of, okay, well, what is the administration going to do about bringing these kinds of people, these controversial, on both sides, bringing these controversial speakers to campus and things like that? Sometimes it's just not a good business decision.
Yeah. I
Right?
agree.
It's not about whether or not we care about society and free speech. Sometimes it's just not good for business to have these things happen. And the university runs on money.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times these decisions that are being made aren't necessarily being made because they dislike free speech. or because they dislike the speech that's actually being put forth. It's that having said speech is going to mess with their money.
Hmm.
And that's a lot of time when you start seeing the plugs get pulled.
Yeah, and very important that you mentioned like my relationship with the university is very transactional, just like everybody's relationship. Because at the end of the day, like education is for profit, and so yeah, that's like where we are with that now. And thank you for that. A lot there to unpack. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about DEI, hot topic issue today, and many misconceptions out there. So you're an educator and you were once a student. How do you interpret the backlash against DEI, and what is the subliminal messaging in this?
Some people are simply arguing in bad faith,
Mm-hmm.
just simply arguing in bad faith because they know that it can actually get them elected.
No,
It
okay.
can get them power. It can get them money. It can get them influence. So some people are just simply doing it in bad faith. Okay. Now, what you have to understand is that, and I'm sure you know this as a journalism student, like bite-sized, catchy stuff are things that regular people can latch on to.
Yeah.
Right? And so having an acronym, that's what an acronym is, right? That's the point of an acronym, is to take this long thing and shrink it down. And that's why acronyms end up looking like words.
Yeah.
Or that's why they mirror words. People will change the name of their organization so that their acronym can actually come up and say something that's a real word, right? And so that's just a linguistic thing. That's just a language thing. And so if you can put a convenient tag on something, then it's going to resonate for individuals who are trying to come up with a conceptualization of it on both sides, on the pro side and the con side, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to is going to is going to allow people to then it becomes a signal that people can then attach whatever they want to with it. Okay, so that's the first part, right? So DEI means everything and it means nothing because it has simply become a catch-all term, a catch-all acronym for certain things that are and have always underlied American government and the American public and things like that, right? So, what are we seeing with DEI? First off, and we can talk about this in a second, but first off, a lot of people don't understand what DEI really is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you tell us what it is?
All right. So there 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 are literally there are literally three parts to it,
Yeah.
right? And each part is a little different,
Yes.
right? And so if you think about it just generally, there's this idea that we're just better with more viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
And our viewpoints come from our life circumstances. And everyone's life circumstances are different.
Yeah.
That's going to make their viewpoints different. And so then you would want those people to actually be there to talk about it,
Yeah.
right? And so you think about if you're like selling a product or something like that, and you want to sell a product to the masses, but you don't have the masses at the table, how are you ever going to know what the masses want?
Of course.
Right? So you need to have someone there that's actually able to give that voice to say, no, there's another culture out here that does things this way, or this may be offensive to these kind of people and stuff like that. That's the diversity part.
Mm-hmm.
The equity part is more this idea that not everybody shows up with the same set of skills,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not everyone shows up with the same background. Not everyone shows up going to the same high school and all that other kind of stuff. And so we have to take steps to actually end up. We have to take steps to try to help those people out, right? Because, and I'll get to this point in a second, right? We have to take steps to actually help those people out because they're our fellow spiders, right? We like them. We want them to be better. We want them to get out and get good jobs. And the inclusivity part, that's probably the biggest part for me. That's the part that I think a lot of people really miss. And so I had a student who was in my she was actually a fellow for my race and racism project. She was one of the people that were big on that protect the web stuff that we had during COVID. And so what y'all call the humanities building was originally Ryland Hall, right?
Yep.
Named after Robert Ryland,
Mm-hmm.
who was an enslaver and who, that's why we got the Burying Ground Project and all that, right? Because Robert Ryland, you know, the president of the university used to have to be the custodian. So they had to make sure that the grass was cut. He needed someone to cut the grass, so he writes to his parents, say, can you send me the slaves? So the slaves were the ones that first started cutting the yards and doing the landscaping and all that around Richmond, right? Anyway, that's not the point. So the humanities building is Ryland Hall. And so my student, she was like, how am I supposed to feel walking in here, taking a test with a building named after someone who would have enslaved my ancestors?
Yeah.
And that's something that we have to recognize. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
And so no matter where you are on the subject, those feelings are valid.
Yeah, very
Those feelings
valid.
are really valid. Okay, so now about the DEI. DEI can be used in a nefarious way. DEI can be used in a situation to try to hurt white males or white people in general. It can be. If someone who is in a position of power just gets to the point of some kind of extreme militancy, where they say the scales have been tipped one way for so long, I'm just not even going to consider a white male for this program, right?
Yeah.
That's not right.
Yeah.
And it could happen.
But is that what's happening now?
It could be.
Okay.
Right? There, because if you listen to a lot of if you listen to a lot of the kind of expressions about how people are going to try to correct these past wrongs, a lot of them are saying, all right, not a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
Not a lot of them, right? Here's the point. Not a lot of them are saying that, but it could be the case.
Okay.
In the same way, the white man or the white woman could say, I'm not hiring the Latina or I'm not hiring the black man. In the exact same way, right? Both are wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if I am all about diversity, and so then African Americans get hired or Latinos get hired at a faster rate than whites, there's no way for me to distinguish which side is that person on. Right? There's no way for me to distinguish if this person is doing it simply because they don't want a certain kind of person in the office, or they're doing it because of the diversity, and then these are the kind of people that they're actually bringing. So really quickly, and so what's happened? So this is social identity theory. This guy Henry Toffel writes this, and so it's just this idea that people sort themselves into in groups and out groups. Right? And so whoever you think is your in group, you're going to want what's best for them. And whoever you think is your out group, you're going to want more for what's your in group than your out group.
Yeah.
And resources are scarce, right? Resources are scarce. So every single seat that goes to someone at this university, someone doesn't get it.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, if we only view ourselves in this in-group, out-group manner, that means that what I think about is the idea that you getting this position, and you're not, I don't consider you part of my group. You getting this position means that my group did not get the position. That's undeniable.
Okay.
The rationale as to why that may be, the rationale about qualifications and all that other kind of stuff, that's not the point. The point is, if I think of you as different than me, the seat you get means that someone who is in my group did not get that seat. And that's why you're able to latch on to wokeness. And that's why you're able to latch on to DEI. Because all you're doing is you are accentuating the in groups and out groups. And so then you're making it a resource game. And you make it a resource game that you then say these people are not qualified for, particularly these racial and ethnic minorities, and these women are not qualified for it. Well, the reason why you think that they're not qualified for it is because you've been perpetuating these stereotypes about them and their culture and their behaviors and their proclivities. You've been perpetuating this since the very beginning of the country. And so it's really easy for you to believe in that when a lot of everything that you're seeing is telling you that. So then that DEI stuff becomes a really easy story to then say, okay, you've indoctrinated me and my parents and my grandparents our entire lives that these people are undeserving. They're undeserving, and that's why they're in the situation why they're in. That's why they're slaves.
Yeah.
That's why they're in jail. That's why their schools suck, because of their culture.
Yeah.
Right? That it is their place at the bottom of society is an indication of their deficiencies. And so once you've actually said, well, you're the ones all on welfare, you're the ones all in jail, you're the ones with all the single parents. Once you just keep beating people over the head with those stats, and then someone comes in and you start seeing them actually gain socioeconomic status, you see them starting to get, then you say, okay, it must be unfair. And that's why I say the people who are arguing in bad faith, that's what they're able to latch on to.
Yeah.
Now, how does DEI actually work? I can only speak for us.
Yeah.
Right? I can only speak for particularly in the hiring that we're doing of professors and in college admissions and things like that. And the way we, particularly at the University of Richmond, the way we think about DEI is just casting a wider net.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's just going out and looking at places where people, stones that you haven't overturned, right? Like places where you may not recruit, or to like actually make that extra effort to go and recruit in different kind of high schools, different kinds of things like that. Because this whole idea of DEI pilots, and you really telling me that there's not one qualified pilot of color? There's not one qualified LGBTQ. There's not one right? You're not going to say that, right? And so I think that that's a lot of what has happened with this DEI stuff. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, thank you so much. And you gave me a lot to think about. Sure, my viewers too, a lot to think about. And yeah, I think we can only talk about it in like the higher education and like hiring process here, because DEI does look different in other places, like the private sector. So yeah, I think it's important to. I think a lot of people, why they might not like DEI is because they say that it's showing some type of favoritism for like people of color. And I think you brought up a good point where maybe it could get to that point where people are taking an extreme stance and no longer supporting white men, or only wanting to hire like a person of a certain race. But yeah, I like you said, I think it's more than that, and it's not even that either.
And see, here's the thing, and this is the thing that people miss. Here's the thing that people miss about this. DEI is different than affirmative action.
Yeah.
Okay. Affirmative action was designed to give minorities a leg up. Right? Affirmative action was, if you go read it, if you go explicitly look at it, it was designed to make that gap up between racial and ethnic minorities or women and white males.
Yeah.
And there's no way that that can happen. You are essentially saying under affirmative action that we think that these people need a leg up to get into these spaces,
Yeah.
right? No quotas, right? They used to do quotas. They can't do quotas anymore. But affirmative action, as it was originally conceptualized, was definitely saying we need to take affirmative steps to put Latinos in these spaces, to put women in these spaces, to put that's what it was about, right?
Yeah.
And everyone knew the deal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That is not DEI.
Yeah.
So now, when we start thinking about the lawsuits about college admissions, or when we start thinking about stuff like pre-clearance and the Voting Rights Act and things like that, what the Supreme Court is doing is basically the Supreme Court is saying, okay, you wanted, you showed me the stats that said this is what happened with the Voting Rights Act. This is what I do, right? You showed me the stats that there are places in Mississippi and Alabama where 90% of the white population is registered to vote and only 10% of the black population. Only 20%. That's like how bad it really was.
Yeah.
There were more blacks than whites. Only 20% of the black population is actually registered to vote. Something is wrong, right? Y'all are doing something here that isn't right. This is your poll taxes, these are your literacy tests, things like that. Something has to be going on if 90% of whites are registered to vote, but only 20% of blacks, okay? So we need the Voting Rights Act, right? So no poll taxes, all this, but this is when we get pre-clearance, right? This is when we get, if you're changing your law in a way that seems as though it's going to affect racial and ethnic minorities, it has to be pre-cleared for the federal government. So then they sue about it. And so John Roberts goes and he looks, and in those same places, there are more blacks registered than whites. Or black-white registration is equal. Or blacks are voting more than whites, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you look at higher education, and if we just look at colleges writ large, right? African Americans are at about their population. You know, they're 12%, 13%. So if
Yeah.
you look at all colleges, right, we're including community colleges, but still all colleges.
Yeah.
African Americans are right where they're supposed to be. Latinos are right. And so particularly for the Voting Rights Act, what they're saying is, okay, well, you got to show me that it's a problem. Because the thing that we started this about, that was the problem, does not appear to be the problem anymore.
Yeah.
So while, yes, there is still a problem, the solution that we put in was a solution to that problem that isn't there anymore. So now we still have problems, but we can't still use that solution because that problem is clearly not a problem anymore.
Yeah.
And so this is when we transition more into this kind of DEI framework.
Mm-hmm.
This is when we transition more into this, okay, well, we know there aren't legal barriers or all this other kind of stuff, but we also know that we're not very diverse. And so how can we actually go about fixing that?
Yeah, and thank you again for differentiating between affirmative action and DEI, because I do think it can get a little easy to mix them together and not exactly get both of them right.
And what I also say is really quickly, what we see about affirmative action, and so to some extent DEI, but definitely to some extent DEI, but definitely affirmative action, is that it privileges the already privileged people of those classes.
Yeah.
So it's the middle class blacks, it's the middle class Latinos, it's the ones that went to the suburban, right? You go to a suburban school, you go to an all white school, all that other kind of stuff. But your application comes in, boom, you click black, you're just like every other black person, right? So it's not those inner city kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it's not those first generation college kids and things like that. Those are the ones that are really, really benefiting from the DEI stuff. from the affirmative action stuff. What we've seen, what the stats have shown, is that generally, if you look at the Latino populations on college campuses, if you look at the Black populations on college campuses, they're overwhelmingly middle class.
Wow. Interesting. I did not know that. Thank you for telling me that. Something to think about. Yeah, I guess it's not really thought about like inner city kids, and I will say that me being here, like I've definitely met a lot of wealthy Latinos that I don't necessarily meet back home, and so definitely interesting seeing that class gap too, and how class also plays an issue. Um, and so while we're on the topic of DEI and some people may oppose DEI also because they may say that we're in a post-racial or color, and where we should be a colorblind America. Do you think we're in a post-racial America?
No, of course not. No.
Okay. Yeah.
And I say that because as humans, evolutionarily, we need ways to distinguish between who's on our team and who's not.
Yeah.
Right. And the easiest way to distinguish who's on your team and who's not is phenotype. You know what I mean? Like, boom, I can see you right off. I don't know how rich you are. I don't know how smart you are. I don't know what your education is. I don't know what your religion is. I don't know anything about that. But I know you look different than me. And so that's a really easy way to differentiate between certain types of people. And so therefore, it is a way when we start thinking about the in-group and out-group aspects of it, it is a way that we can then say, all right, those people are not like me, so I'm okay with them having less resources. And so that's why when you start talking about a colorblind society or a post-racial society, that idea works for some people and doesn't work for other people. The thing about it, and this is one of the real catch-22s I talk about with my students all the time, right? So you want to be colorblind, fine, great. But if you're colorblind, how am I going to know racism exists? Because you can say you're colorblind, but not be.
Yeah.
You can say, and so we can have color blindness all over the place where we don't ask you your race. We don't, we're colorblind, all this. That doesn't mean you actually are.
Yeah.
But if we're not asking what your race is, how do I know racism is there? And so asking about race shows us the disparities.
Yeah.
That's how we know a Black or Latino master's student makes less than a white bachelor student. Right? That's how we know the differences in poverty. That's how we know all these kinds of things, because we're actually looking at what's happening based on race.
Yeah.
And so if we didn't look at it, if we didn't ask race, it's not going to stop people from being racist.
Yeah.
It's not going to stop people from separating in groups and out groups.
Yeah.
But we're not going to have the hard stats to say, look at these discrepancies. Let's do something about it.
Yeah. I think that's really important, and yeah, we do need to take action too. And yeah, I agree. We're nowhere near a colorblind America.
And that's the other thing, right? Like, and so I hear all this, I hear this all the time, right? Like, if the University of Richmond decided to be colorblind,
Yeah,
it would get whiter.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Because of high school pipelines and PSAT prep and
Yeah.
tutors and your parents have actually written college essays before. Your letters of recommendation come from the mayor of your town or the, you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
And so if you're talking about, oh, we just shouldn't ask for color stuff, the system is set up in a way to where certain people are gonna get privileged.
Yeah.
And so you ask about the whole color blindness and that kind of stuff, it's not going to do what people think it's going to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do want to pivot a little bit to I guess violence in the Black community.
Okay.
I think I mean, I grew up in a time where one of the things I most remember talking about, like when I was like in second grade, because that's when Trayvon Martin died. um, his I think his death shaped the generation. And George Zimmerman, who was his killer, was ultimately acquitted.
Mhm.
And I didn't know this. I actually found this out while looking this up, but he ended up selling his gun at auction for $250,000. And
And he started painting too.
yeah,
He,
somebody told me he was doing art too.
he started painting too.
And so, like I remember it was such a weird time because I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I was only like 9 years old, I think. And I remember my teachers were scared, my mentors were scared, my principal, everyone around me that was like grown, was scared. And so, him selling his gun and him being acquitted, what do you think that says about like well, I guess during that time it was 2012. So like what do you think it says about America during that time?
Nothing.
Okay.
Same America.
Okay. Yeah.
Just social media.
What
Same
Oh, you mean
America.
like just being more aware of what
Yeah.
was going Okay.
Yeah. Just yeah. Same America. Just social media
Okay.
and same America social media. But I'm sorry, that was a bit flippant. But so we got black president, right? So take it all the way back to this resource question,
Mhm.
right? And take it back to the resource question as to who do I think that person is going to look out for? So if my whole life is set up in group, out group, in group, out group, in group, and so I know that I'm okay with the out group not having as much as long as the in group has it, I'm going to think everyone else is like that. So I think everyone else is like that. When this person of the out group becomes president, I automatically think that that person is going to handle their business the same way I handle mine. And so that person is going to be more for their group than they are my group. Okay, so
Yeah.
so that's the beginning of the whole Obama thing. This is when the Obama thing starts going downhill. And so now we're at a time where there's much more polarization
Yeah.
in the country. Right, the parties are more ideologically consistent. Right, the Republicans, all the conservatives are now Republicans. There used to be conservative Democrats. All the liberals are now Democrats and things like that. And so we're getting in the situation where now society is playing itself out in politics.
Mhm.
And so when Trayvon happens, it comes in a situation where the it comes in a situation where it was just too visible,
Yeah.
right? It was just too visible. But Trayvon is easily a one off if not for everything that kept happening after
Yeah.
that, right? If not for Mike Brown, if not for Sandra Boyd, if not for Breonna Taylor, if not for George Floyd, like if not for any of those things, Trayvon Martin just happens and goes away. I could tell you plenty of stories right now, black kids getting shot. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like it happens all the time, right? But it was a situation where just the absurdity of the rule and the absurdity of the narrative that was played out about how these events actually happened
Yeah.
really, really kind of shook people.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that you mention it wasn't just like a one-off because we've seen many Black individuals die because of police brutality and racism. And so Trayvon Martin's death sparked the Black Lives Matter movement,
Mhm.
and it was really important for political discourse then, and I think political discourse now. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on the BLM movement? And I guess for critics that may say that it's not needed anymore.
Okay, I make this point all the time, and so all right, so if we're doing the Civil Rights Act, whatever it is, in 1960, right, 1964, right? You can tell me it's going to get better in 1974. You can tell me it's going to get better in 1984. You can tell me it's going to get better in 1994. You can tell me it's going to get better in 2004. When's it going to get better? You can tell me it's going to get better in 24. Well, wait a second now. You've been telling me this for 50 years. Okay. That's the situation that Black Lives Matter comes up in.
Yeah.
Right. That's the situation where these economic gains are not happening. This incarceration is getting worse.
Mhm.
Segregation is getting worse. Education is getting worse. All these things are getting worse with a black man as president. Okay. So it's like, what are you really gonna tell me? Like what's really going on here? Now specifically to BLM, and they've had their problems with the corruption and things like that.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that the thing about Black Lives Matter was just their rejection of respectability politics. And that was something really, 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 really interesting, right? Started by 3 queer women, right? And so if you notice, if you look back at the civil rights movement, pictures and some videos, they're all in suits.
Yeah.
Right? They're all in suits, hats. They're Sunday best.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you were LGBTQ, they wouldn't let you there. If you didn't own a suit, they wouldn't let you march. If you were a woman, you couldn't be at the head of the table to actually, do strategy. It was a very patriarchal, very top-down movement where they essentially said, you aren't going to put our best face forward, so we don't need you.
Yeah.
Go away. Okay. Black Lives Matter consciously set out and said, we're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. We're going to let everyone who cares about Black lives, I don't care about, we may have different solutions.
Yeah.
We may come from different backgrounds, but we're not going to be the gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. Because that gatekeeping is a subjectivity where you're essentially saying some people are better for the group or some people are worth more to the group than are others. Okay. Now, what comes with that? Are you going to get the people who want to loot? Yes. Are you going to get the people who want anarchy and want to confront the police and all? Yes, you're going to get that. But you're also going to get a movement where everyone at least knows they have a place. And so I think that was one of the really interesting things that Black Lives Matter as an organization did, was they consciously rejected that kind of respectability. Now, could it have been more centralized? So if we're talking about the study of social movements, we talk about how social movements work, would a more centralized organization maybe have gotten more tangible gains? Right? Maybe not have splintered off into these other groups, or we see it right now. Local Black Lives Matter chapters are saying crazy stuff that, has to be disavowed by the chapter in the next city over and all that other kind of stuff, right? Would that have made progress better? Maybe, maybe not. But that's definitely what they set out to do with their organization.
Yeah. And thank you for that. I didn't know about the respectability aspect of it. That's not something that I really think about, and I think that people think about in general. But yeah, I'm just thinking about all the pictures that I've seen. Yeah, definitely suits and hats, Sunday's best.
And you saw a definite age divide.
Yeah. Where
like the older people, you got people with saggy pants and tattoos, but you have to understand that Martin Luther King respectability was rooted in this idea that we had to show, that Blacks had to show white people that they could fit into their society.
Yeah.
They could dress like them. They could speak like them. They could follow God like them. That's why MLK is a preacher, right? They could follow God like them. And so therefore, once you realize that we're not actually that different, you should be okay letting us into your society. Black Lives Matter comes to a point where all of that respectability does not seem to have been particularly fruitful. And so it's like, why do it the same old way? Why not do it a new way?
Yeah. Um, Definitely something to think about, and definitely, yeah, that perspective is really important. Um, I guess a lot of symbolism too with Black Lives Matter. I think especially after 2020, we saw the Black Lives Matter mural in DC,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's being removed. And I think it's just also kind of joint efforts of also like kind of denying like everything's like getting bunched into like DEI and all that. And so, what does the erasure signify, if it signifies anything?
That they didn't think it was necessary in the first place.
Okay. Do you think that sends a dangerous message, or do you think
To
it's
whom?
well, I guess to say, I mean, I guess a lot of people feel, some type of erasure, I guess, with seeing like the mural being removed because it's just being removed.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm like just wondering, is that like what does the erasure signify?
That the people who have the power to remove murals don't think that it's necessary,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
Like, no one's stopping you from buying a billboard and painting a mural that says Black Lives Matter and putting it right up there on the side of the freeway
Yeah.
every day, right? No one's stopping you from putting a wall in front of your house and painting the. Whenever I go up and down 64 or 95. Have you ever been and you see these huge Confederate flags, right? Like, I mean, massive. Like, how do they make flags that big, right? But
Yeah.
right, but that's on their property, right?
Mhm.
And so, if you want the federal government to then say, okay, we believe in these things, then you need to be the federal government. Because if the federal government doesn't believe in those things, then why have the mural in the first place?
Okay.
Right? Why even pay lip service to it? So, if you're asking, is it an erasure? Yes, it's an erasure. But those people who are erasing it never thought it was necessary in the first place.
Yeah.
Never thought it was a big enough deal to paint a mural about in the first place. So you can't get mad at them erasing it when they didn't want it in the first place.
Yeah. I guess so. That definitely is yeah, I mean it's true, right? Because they definitely don't see that it is necessary or something that should have happened, or I mean we've seen, I guess, the president call BLM a terrorist organization. And
Mhm.
yeah, so I guess we can't really get that surprised. I think it's fair to be upset, but
Yep.
it's not
Right.
surprising
Right.
that they would do that.
Right.
And
And find other places to make your mural.
yeah.
There are plenty of buildings in Washington D.C. There are plenty of buildings in Richmond, Virginia, where they'd be happy to have your mural. Right? What
Yeah.
is your mural? Is it about your mural or about the fact that you get to paint it on the government property? Right? Like which is valid. Right?
Yeah.
The state. This is inclusivity. The state actually caring about you and your cares enough to put a mural about the stuff that you like on their property is very, very, very important, right? But if you are just trying to memorialize the event, then put your mural anywhere.
Yeah. And I think that's, great advice, because we have free will, utilize our free will to put a mural anywhere and send the message that we want to send anyway. And so, thank you so much for coming on. I have one like last fun question for you, if
All
that's
right.
okay. So, if you can go in the past, any time in the past, in history, anywhere, any country, without changing the future, you would just be an observer. Where would you go? I've had someone say like they would go back to Africa before colonization. I've had someone say they would go into the future, like 50 years, to see like what it would look like. But I guess
What I
it's
was gonna say, but I don't even know if this is gonna. I don't even know if this is appropriate. I was gonna say the Garden of Eden.
okay.
If that's a thing, if there's a time
Yeah.
when that happened or not, right? If if you believe in that kind of thing, right? That would be like really cool
Yeah.
to see what was going on at that time. So
Yeah. A very good point. Well, thank you again for coming on. We a lot of discussion, and I appreciate your time, and I hope that you guys all tune in for next week's episode. Thank you so much.